You walk into an empty cathedral, or a parking garage at midnight, or one of those vast, echoing airport terminals at 5 a.m. when the cleaning crews haven't arrived yet and the lights are still on their overnight dim. And without thinking, without deciding, you get quieter. Maybe you stop talking entirely. If you're with someone, you both do it simultaneously, without negotiating it. If you're alone, you might not even notice it happening because there's no one to notice it with. You just compress. Pull inward. The space does something to you and you respond without knowing why. Here's the thing, there's no one to disturb. The cathedral is empty. The parking garage is empty. The terminal has maybe 3 people in it and they're all 100 meters away. The social reason for being quiet doesn't exist. And yet, you're quiet. So what's actually happening? Because the easy answer, echoes, acoustics, you're just being sensible, turns out to be the least interesting part of a much stranger story. Let's start with the physics, because it's actually worth understanding before we discard it. When sound waves leave your mouth, they travel outward in all directions. In a room full of people, those waves hit bodies almost immediately. Soft tissue, clothing, hair, all of it absorbs sound. A human being is, acoustically speaking, a remarkably good sponge. Pack enough of them into a room and they eat the reverb entirely. That's why a crowded pub sounds different from an empty one even if the noise level is technically identical. The crowd isn't just making sound, it's also eating it. Now remove the people. The sound waves reach the walls instead. Hard, flat, reflective surfaces. They bounce back, then bounce again, then again. This is reverberation, the stacking of reflected waves, and it does something specific and uncomfortable to speech. It smears it. A word you spoke a moment ago arrives back at your ears slightly delayed, slightly distorted, layered on top of the next word you're currently saying. Your own voice becomes interference. So your brain, being the efficient system it is, solves the problem quietly. It turns the source volume down. Less input, less reflected noise, cleaner signal. This is why you get quieter in reverberant spaces. It's a closed-loop correction. And it happens faster than conscious thought, which is the first strange thing about it. You didn't decide to do it, something else did. But here's where it gets interesting. Because if this were purely an acoustic compensation, you'd expect the effect to scale linearly with reverb. More echo, quieter voice. Less echo, back to normal, clean and mechanical. That's not what happens. The effect is inconsistent in ways that the physics alone can't explain. People get quieter in spaces where reverberation is minimal, but the room is large. Vast open spaces with almost no reflective surfaces, think a flat desert or an empty field, produce the same hushed response in many people despite there being almost no echo at all. Something else is in the mix. Researchers studying what's sometimes called acoustic ecology, the relationship between humans and sound environments, have noted that the human nervous system appears to treat certain spatial configurations as inherently significant regardless of their acoustic properties. Large, empty, still spaces trigger a response that sits somewhere between alertness and awe. Your pulse may drop slightly, your movement slow, and your voice drops. This is not politeness. This is your body reading the room in a way that has nothing to do with rooms as we currently build them. It's much, much older than architecture. Think about what a large, empty, quiet space meant for most of human history. It meant you were somewhere unusual, outside the social group. Somewhere without the ambient proof of safety that other people's voices provide. Large empty spaces were, for the vast majority of our evolutionary past, places where things that ate you lived. Your nervous system hasn't forgotten this. It still knows the difference between a space that is full of people and a space that only contains you, and it responds accordingly. Lowering your voice is the body's version of moving carefully. Don't announce yourself. Don't give away your position. Be small. The instinct is ancient. The parking garage is new. The instinct doesn't care. There's a field of study called psychoacoustics, the relationship between sound and psychological state, and some of its findings are genuinely unsettling in a quiet, interesting way. Reverberation time, the measurement of how long it takes for a sound to decay to inaudibility in a given space, has measurable effects on human cognition and mood. Long reverberation times are associated with states of awe, reverence, and reduced sense of personal agency. You feel smaller. You feel slower. You feel, and this is the word researchers actually use, humbled. This is not accidental. Cathedrals were built by people who understood this intuitively without ever running an experiment. The long nave, the stone walls, the enormous vertical space, these are not just aesthetic choices. They are acoustic engineering in the service of a specific psychological state. You are supposed to feel small. You are supposed to lower your voice. The architecture is producing the behavior on purpose. Which raises a slightly uncomfortable question. When you walk into a modern space, a shopping center, a corporate atrium, an airport, and you feel that same hushed response, what is the space doing to you? Because those spaces were also designed. Not always with the same intentionality as a cathedral, but designed nonetheless. Acoustic consultants are real. They make deliberate choices about reverb, about ceiling height, about hard versus soft surfaces. And those choices shape your behavior in ways you don't consciously register. The question of why you lower your voice becomes the question of who built the room and what they wanted you to feel. Sometimes the answer is God. Sometimes it's a retail brand manager. The nervous system's response is identical either way. In 2015, Microsoft built what was certified as the world's quietest room, an anechoic chamber, a room specifically designed to eliminate reverberation entirely. The walls, floor, and ceiling are covered in foam wedges that absorb effectively all sound. There is no echo. There is no reverb. The ambient noise level sits at around -20 decibels, which is below the threshold of what we previously thought was measurable. You could hear a pin drop from across the room. You could hear the pin before it dropped, arguably. Journalists and visitors were invited in to experience it. Their accounts are strikingly consistent. People who went in expecting peace reported something much closer to distress. In the absence of any external sound, the body becomes loud. You hear your own heartbeat, your own breathing, the sound of blood moving in your ears. One person described it as the room pressing back. The maximum time anyone has voluntarily remained in the room is reported to be around 45 minutes. After that, something becomes intolerable. The theory is that human beings use ambient sound as a kind of constant background proof that the world is still there. We're not consciously listening to it, but we're using it. Remove it entirely, and the nervous system starts questioning what it's receiving. Now consider this in reverse. When you enter a very large, very quiet space and you lower your voice, you are, in some small way, protecting that silence. Not for anyone else's benefit, for your own. The quiet large space is giving you something, a kind of auditory breathing room, a sense of scale, a momentary suspension of social noise, and some part of you recognizes this and doesn't want to ruin it, even when you're alone, especially when you're alone. So why do you lower your voice in large empty spaces? The acoustic explanation is real. The evolutionary explanation is real. The architectural manipulation is real. The protective instinct toward something you value without knowing you value it, that one might be the most real of all. But I think what's actually happening, underneath all of it, is something simpler and stranger than any of these explanations. Large, empty, quiet spaces are one of the few remaining environments in modern life where you can genuinely feel scale. Feel how big things actually are. The cathedral, the empty terminal, the parking garage at midnight, they give you, briefly, a sense of your own size relative to the world. And you respond to that information. You get quieter because the space is telling you something true about your own proportions, and some ancient part of you knows how to listen. You don't lower your voice because there's no one to disturb. You lower your voice because the space is already saying something. You're just trying not to talk over it.